Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by 35,217 people from 160 countries and is supported by 495 organisations. We have over 100 volunteer activists, including 53 country contacts. And if you would like to join us as a volunteer, that would be fantastic, so we can continue to promote women's sex-based rights and do even better than we're doing. We had WDI, Women's Declaration International, had a very successful conference on April the 1st in London and also online. And we live streamed one of the rooms onto Zoom. So we had participants, nearly 100 participants at some times, watching what was happening in the room. And we also had women from all over the world zooming in and presenting. Now, that was the first time we've done this. We had 4 rooms in real life and over 100 women in real life, and then many women online participating. And it went pretty well, we think, and we've learned a lot from it, and we're aiming to do it again in October, and to try to do more of this international networking, I think it's a hybrid event. So we're aiming to do that. And if you are interested in getting involved in planning that and speaking or doing tech, then send in an email saying you'd like to help or be involved. But otherwise, I mean, it's October, so it's miles away. It was called What Is to Be Done, and we did get quite a lot of good ideas of what is to be done. So now WDI are working on doing it. So if you have things you'd like to do and think you can collaborate with WDI, then do get involved or continue to get involved, as many of us are doing. Later on, after this webinar, we will have a screening of an episode of Dr. Phil, which is a sort of chat show in the States, and Kara Dansky, the US chapter president of WDI, was on that and did a sterling job, an amazing job in promoting women's sex-based rights. And if you're watching later on YouTube, the US WDI YouTube channel has clips of that really good show, so you can watch that. It's very good. Right, bit of news from Belgium. There was a first Let Women Speak event in Brussels last Sunday, the 9th, which was sort of organised partly by WDI country contact there and attended by it. And she's who's giving us this news. She said, "The women of all ages, mothers, grandmothers, lesbians and straight women, most importantly, both the Flemish region and the Walloon region were represented," so the 2 different language and culture groups. The talks ranged from paediatric gender medicine to sports to the disappearance of lesbian spaces and the inability to talk about it openly. No hostility was seen from the occasional bystanders. And they're going to plan to have another one. So that's fantastic news from Brussels, and from Belgium. We also have news from our Finnish country contact, who says, "Here in Finland, self-ID came into force this week." And this was a couple of weeks ago, so it's the 4th of April she wrote this. "But we have interesting developments as pseudo-progressives or staunchest genderists, the Greens and the Left Alliance, lost several seats in Parliament in the elections last weekend. We might soon have a rather right-wing government, but the self-ID legislative process showed who is willing to defend women's sex-based rights." So they're sort of outing themselves, and we're getting more idea of who's going to fight for women's sex-based rights. So self-ID for minors is presented as a legislative issue in the coming years, and WDI Finland, the Women's Front, LHB League, and the Finnish country contact of WDI are going to fight, and they actually are now in contact with many of the members of Parliament who are going to help them. Now, I'm really pleased to introduce today's speakers. We have today, we have the famous artist Bertie Rose from the UK, and she's an artist, and she's been involved in this struggle since before anybody knew about it. So, and has done an unbelievably brilliant job. So first of all, we're going to hear from her. And as an artist, and also having had been in this understanding for a long time. Then we're going to hear from Nicoletta Hoffman, who's from the EU, Hungary, UK, and about a collaborative action against the EU Violence Against Women Directive. And that will be really lots of very useful information in detail about what the EU is doing, supposedly looking good on violence against women, but absolutely not being very good. So Nicoletta will tell us about that. Then we'll hear from Gunda Schumann from Germany, and she's going to tell us about the activities of Lesbisches, LAZ Reloaded, I'm going to say, which is a lesbian group, and other lesbian groups against transgenderism and and also lesbian networking on this issue. So our first speaker today, I'm really pleased to say, is the famous artist Bertie Rose, and she's going to talk to us about creating a new counterculture. So welcome, Birdy, and over to you.
I'm the famous artist Bertie Rose. To anyone who doesn't know who I am and what I do, I have been an artist for a really long time. I actually started painting over 10 years ago, and I met my partner, who's a musician, and we actually lived in a van for 7 years, and we were touring on the road, and we were doing gigs and doing festivals. He was constantly booked, and I was doing my art and selling prints at festivals and gigs. And over the years, we just got more and more popular in what we were doing on a very small scale on the grassroots scene in the UK. And in 2017, we started to notice that the scene was changing, and the attitude, I thought the attitude was changing, but I don't think it actually was. I think it's always been like this. There's always been an authoritarian streak in art, and I don't think I noticed it because I wasn't one of the sore thumbs that was sticking out and creating chaos, if that makes sense. I was conforming by not poking my head out of the parapet. So, and that wasn't intentional. I mean, I've always been a little bit sort of, I don't want to be told what to do. So it wasn't intentional that I was a conformist, but I just wasn't controversial. And a lot of my art was about escapism. It was escaping into another world. And I used to have an attitude of, I don't want to be political with my art because I want to create another world to escape into, because the culture and the politics is so stressful. So as I was noticing the atmosphere change around her, I noticed this trans thing creeping into our environment. And we had some friends that were identifying as trans back then, and I didn't really mind it because I didn't think it was a big deal. I didn't know anybody was going to start actually saying that they've changed into the opposite sex and that I have to conform to this and that I have to comply. I had no idea that was going to happen. I just saw it as people doing their thing and not really any of my business. It doesn't affect me. And then it did start to affect me because on the music and art scene, more and more people were talking about inclusivity and diversity and how we have to respect pronouns, and this trans rights thing was creeping up a bit more. So I started looking into it. Obviously, I found the Magdalene Burns videos on YouTube, and I'm sure everybody knows who Magdalene Burns is. And I started to understand this is actually a real thing. This is like people are actually saying that lesbians have to sleep with men and stuff like that. And so that came into my environment as an artist. There were musicians that identified as trans, and one of them said something about how, you know, people are campaigning for the law to change so that if I want to sleep with somebody, I have to tell them I'm trans. And I remember saying, well, you know, if you are getting into an intimate relationship with somebody, you should really be honest about who you are. And so that became a point of contention in our scene and among our musician friends. I didn't realise. I thought I was just giving my opinion and that's that. I thought it was just common sense. But I didn't realise that this was getting people's backs up. And obviously I started watching Magdalene Burns videos after that. And then I got cancelled for something else, which I won't go into right now, but I got cancelled for something else. And that was my first time being cancelled, but it wasn't the proper cancellation. The proper cancellation came in 2020 in the middle of lockdowns. And what happened was I had started drawing portraits of women that I really like. And I think the intention for me was, first of all, portraits are my worst thing as an artist. I'm not like, I've always dreaded portraits. So I thought I should challenge myself and work on the thing that I feel the least confident in. So I started drawing portraits, and I wanted to draw portraits of women who have been dehumanized in our culture. Women like Magdalene Byrne, Kelly J. Keane, women like J.K. Rowling. The J.K. Rowling, Magdalene Byrne, and Kelly J. Keane were the first three that I drew. And they were the first ones that came to my mind that I want to show their humanity. I want to put out a picture of them and put out like a really good quote that they've said, and really just sort of like, I like the idea. I didn't even put their names on it because I like the idea of people sharing it, not knowing who this is and liking what they've said and just taking people on face value. And that's not something we're doing much of anymore. So that happened. And within days, I got cancelled by the people that we were on the music scene with, obviously because the atmosphere had changed around them as well. Or maybe it's, like I said, it's always been that way. There's always been an authoritarian streak in art and music. It's like, you have to be unique, you have to be yourself, but do it the way we say or else. And that's how it is. And there's a lot of bad blood on the art and music scenes in the UK, especially the grassroots, in my experience. I've never been in like the elitist art world or in galleries and things like that. I've always been a bit more on the DIY side of things. But there is a sense of like, there's these unspoken rules and you have to abide by the code or you get kicked out, kind of like a little bit culty. And so it got me thinking. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. Some of you that follow me online know that I think about my cancellation a lot and what happened and why we've been exiled from the art and music world, and you know, why my partner can't get any gigs at the moment because he's associated with me, why I lost my livelihood a few years ago, although I've made a comeback, a pretty strong one. And I've been thinking about what's gone wrong with art and music and the art world and writers and poets and comedians and painters and illustrators and all of these people and, you know, singers, songwriters, musicians, dancers. What's going on that made the whole environment completely captured by something that I can only think of as a quasi-religious ideology? It's a belief system. It's faith-based. And historically, I would have always thought that the coolest artists and the coolest musicians and the coolest writers were not into that. They're like anti-establishment. They're going against the grain. They're the counterculture. They're exploring weird ideas, sure, but they're not going to force you to believe in them. They're not going to bully you or become authoritarian and religious in their approach. In theory, I mean, there have been artists that have done stuff like that, but I would have thought that the cool part of art and the cool culture was always going against the grain. And then I was looking at like how so many people on the scene we've been on consider themselves to be this anti-establishment, sort of like punk essence, sort of like the new age punks, and they're not. They're completely conformist. They're very authoritarian. They're very miserable. They buy into every corporation. Everybody, every institution you can think of supports them with their weird ideas. And it got me thinking about how are we going to move forward as a creative culture, and what do we have to do as artists? And my message is to any artist out there, we need to get together and we need to create a counterculture that's so cool, that's so unbelievably adventurous and honest and genuinely sincere, not this fake sincerity, be yourself bullshit, like actual sincerity and honesty and daring to just put your art out there or put your comedy out there and put your writing out there without worrying about whether it's going to be approved of. I want that. And I want that because I think that's going to be so enticing to the next generation, going to be unbelievably appealing and refreshing to see artists just doing their thing and not caring. It doesn't matter whether you believe in this religion or not. You should be able to just do your thing. And that's the spirit I wanted to sort of encourage and get everybody in on. So that's what I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about what the next step is for art and what the culture should be and how it should move forward. I don't know if anybody else has suggestions, and maybe later on people can talk about it. I'll try and stick around for it. And it's just, I don't want to lose art. I think the quickest way to kill off art and music and the creative cultures in general is this sort of pernicious ideology that is stamping out the life of creativity, because being creative is a really brave thing to do, genuinely brave, not like the stunning and brave like men are when they put on a dress, but actually genuinely brave thing to do, to pour your heart and soul out and put a piece of you into a bit of art or a song, or make a dance routine, or whatever it is you're doing. You write a story, you write a book, and it takes a lot of bravery to show that to people, knowing that they could criticize you, and artists don't like being criticized because they've got a little bit of an ego sometimes and it hurts. But you know that the world could poo-poo your thing that you've spent hours on, that you love, that is a piece of you that comes from your mind, and you know that people could hate it. And that is a vulnerability that is very difficult to live with sometimes. And people are being cowards to not embrace that vulnerability in art. They're being cowards when they just follow the established, current, approved of message, and they try to toe the line. It's a different thing to not having the incentive to be political with your art, because you don't have to be, although some people will argue that saying that art is not political is a political statement within itself. But I think as an artist, you do have a duty to reflect the culture around you. And I say duty loosely because I don't think you have to, but all art has been an indication of the times that that artist is living through. We can look at art and music and writing, and we can sort of get a real sort of like sensory indulgence into a time capsule, into what their life was like and what they were living through. So we do have kind of a duty to historically record that in our art. And it is cowardice to not take part in that. It's cowardice to just repeat the current approved of mantras within your art, and to just get by and be approved of, and make sure that you're celebrating the new religion. I think that's cowardice. I think artists need to step up, and they need to speak up, and they need to use their art to do it, because not everybody has to go online and do YouTube videos or shout on Twitter. You've got an ability, and if you've got an ability, use it. And I think the counterculture to what's going on at the moment needs to be that. Art is so powerful. People use art all over the world because it's universal, right? If you've got a picture, even music in any language, it's universal. You can feel it, you can see it, you're using your senses. You don't have to use words. That's everything that I've got to say. That was a mega rant from me.
Thank you, but that's so fantastic. And I've got a question. How do you, so I'm going to add a spotlight. Because you have to make money,
yeah.
So you want to have a broad appeal. How do you reconcile that? Because you're making so how do you just explain
no, I
that?
never listen. I don't mean listen authoritatively. I mean it's just something I say. I never really had much money to begin with, right? When we were living on the road, the whole point of living on the road was, first of all, we couldn't afford a flat, which more for us because the prices have gone up now, right? So, but the thing is, we never had much to begin with, and the idea of us living on the road was the freedom to do our art and music. So with our costs were not high on purpose, because we knew if we had a flat, we'd have to maintain it by getting a job doing something else. And we were in our 20s, and we knew that that was prime time to give it a shot. Go for it. If you want to be a musician, I want to be an artist, go for it, do it. And so the money aspect of it didn't really come into it until I started selling my paintings, and that was just before I got cancelled the first time. I would say I didn't have a choice. When I got cancelled the first time, it was because somebody made up a lie about me that everybody believed. So that was really nothing to do with the ideological thing, although that is tied into it. People did believe the lie because the person who made up the lie about me identifies as trans, so they believed the trans person. I'm getting to the point. But the point is, I didn't have a choice when my livelihood got stripped away from me. So when I came back with my art and I did my portraits, I didn't do it with in mind that I need to make money from art. I did it with in mind of, well, everything's been taken off of me anyway. What have I got to lose? I'll do what I want. And I've always had a kind of I'll do what I want attitude anyway, but I didn't really invest that into my art. I used my art to make beautiful things that were just this other world in my head. I didn't know I had it in me to do this with it. And I caught it in the corner up there. Somebody said art is a weapon. Damn right it is. It can be used as a weapon. And it can be good and it can be dangerous as well. Does that make sense? Like a lot of the art nowadays is propaganda. To an extent, art has always been propaganda as well, because in the old days, it would have been paid for by the church or the state. So and it would have been that message that they want the people to have, and people would have been illiterate and they would have used art to get those messages. So to an extent, it's always propaganda, and I do get accused of being propaganda, but that's another argument. People really have like an icky feeling about money on the art and music scene. They don't like it. They don't want you to make money, and you shouldn't say that you want to make money. But I'm against that now, because I think that's just a way of holding people back and shaming them into not being ambitious. I think you should be ambitious. I'm also a realist, so I think we should be realistic as well. But you should be ambitious, and there's no shame in making money from your art. So when I lost my income, because I didn't have a choice, I didn't really have anything to lose. I think I am in a position now where I have something to lose, but I don't give a shit because I've lost it all before and I'll fight for it all again. Does that make sense? If I have to get another job at McDonald's again, which is what I did the first time I got cancelled, I will. It doesn't matter. I'll still keep doing what I'm doing, regardless of the situation I'm thrown into.
Do you think that quite a lot of the artists don't agree with the transgender ideology and they're doing it just to fit in? So have you had some of them say to you, look, actually, I agree with you, I'm just too scared to speak out?
One of the things that happened the first time I really got cancelled was one of the musicians that I did a lot of artwork for, and I did his album covers and stuff, actually phoned me up and said that one of the people cancelling me has essentially threatened him. Basically said, your new album cover is by the famous artist Bertie Rose. She's a transphobe, and essentially, if you don't want everybody thinks you're a transphobe as well, you need to not work with her. He looked at my website, because she used look at her website, you'll see it for yourself, as sort of like an excuse. So he looked at my website and he phoned me and he said he didn't see anything wrong with what I was doing. Like, I don't understand. I get the feeling he doesn't agree with what's going on, but he did lose me as an artist over that. And the extent of the cowardice, and it's not nice for me to say because I like the guy, but the extent of the cowardice is that he actually asked me to continue to be his artist, but maybe go under a different name so that he doesn't get in trouble, right? And I said no. And that was painful to me. And I don't like to call him a coward, but it is cowardice, because it ain't just about sticking up for me or sticking up for my fella. It's about sticking up for yourself as an artist and telling people, you're not going to tell me how to do my art or who to associate with or how to run my business or how this is going to go. You're not in charge of me. And I, as an artist, have artistic freedom and the right to speak and express myself as I see fit. And I can work with whoever I want. You can't tell me what to do. But these people, they're not thinking of it that way. They're thinking of saving their own art. But in the long run, what they've done is given everybody a free path to tell them what to do, to boss them around, to restrict their artistic freedom. It ain't about sticking up for me. It's about sticking up for yourself.
Okay, we're going to move on now to Nicoletta Hoffman. And Nicoletta Hoffman is a woman human rights defender and life coach, protecting women's sex-based rights and human rights, lesbians' rights, protecting mothers and children from fathers' post-separation domestic violence. Her key focus is now on the situation in the European Parliament and the European Commission, who have refused to protect lesbians, mothers, and gender-critical feminists from all forms of male violence and structural violence. And the title of Nicoletta Hoffman's talk is Collaborative Action Against EU Violence Against Women Directive. So welcome to Feminist Question Time, Nicoletta. It's great to have you here?
So how my work started, in my early 30s, I started to work as Chief of International Media Relations at Hungary's permanent representation to the EU. So I was actually the woman who made Hungary's campaign when we joined the EU. I was full enthusiasm. I was in my early 30s, had a toddler, life was good. I hoped to work for the Commission in a cabinet one day, so I was fully enthusiastic because I have been fed during communism that the EU is something fantastic. So it seems like miracle for me. And the early disappointment started when I realized that it's not how it looks like, that actually women's and children's rights are actually undermined by the European Union itself. And I realized it when I wanted to get divorced from my French husband. I was living and working in Belgium, was Hungarian, and he was French. And I realized that as a parent, as a primary caregiver parent, I have no freedom of movement. I couldn't move to the United Kingdom with my son without his permission. He wanted to coerce me into homelessness, unemployment, and the European Union law supports the abuser. So I realized it early already in the 2005, 2006. There is a horrible Brussels II regulation which has been now amended, which makes actually from the primary caregiver parent a doormat. We know that 85% the mother is the primary caregiver parent. So I realized that the European Union as a legislator and as a political power wants to make from the primary caregiver parent, mostly the mother, a doormat of the non-resident parent and criminalize me if I want to offer for my son a better life. So I think for all of us feminist mothers, lesbian mothers, it's very clear that the EU law is weaponized on a first level to disenfranchise mothers who want to flee from violent fathers.
So was this law as part of the free movement of labour bit of the European
but mothers
Union
have no freedom
laws?
of movement.
Yes.
So as a single parent, even though the father doesn't, as a single mother who has shared custody, if the father does anything, whatever he wants with his life, he can do whatever he still has the right to coerce you to remain where the child is. You have no freedom of movement and you cannot offer a better life for your child. I think that's the biggest betrayal, and single parent poverty is skyrocketing even in Germany. Our friends in Germany knows this. So the EU is actively undermining its own primary goals, which are set out in the treaties to offer a better life. This is not working for lesbians, for mothers, for children. It's not working.
When they say free movement, or maybe for people, those people are the male people, aren't they?
Yes,
that's
of course.
What you found out. And then you challenged that. Can you tell us?
I challenged a lot of things, and I'm so grateful that I found Women's Declaration International, because you connect the dots, you know. And if we connect the dots together, we see that everything goes back to women's subordination. And if you sketch a little bit the surface, you see it. So what's happened, there was this EU regulation which forbids the freedom of movement of the primary caregiver parent with the child, actually. I lost over £2 million, my whole existence, because I moved anyway with my child because I didn't want to stay as a homeless, unemployed mother in Belgium. So first I moved back to Hungary. I was heavily punished by court as a child abductor, parental alienator, whatever you mean, wanting to offer for my son a better life. And then I had to flee in 2013 with my then 13-year-old son to Austria, because the Belgian court gave the abusive father the custody of the child. And then there was a big scandal. I could make a big scandal. Case arrived at the Court of Justice of the European Union. How is it with the freedom of movement of single parents? Austrian Supreme Court asked, actually. And then everything was stopped, because it was in 2016, father dropped the sole custody request and gave me sole custody, because it was visible that people don't want that the case arrives at the Court of Justice of the EU, because everything would have been visible in 2016, that European secondary law is deliberately undermining the primary caregiver parent, mostly the mother, to protect the child from violence, to flee into another member state where there is a better protection, and to offer a better life for the child. So I could get sole custody, and my son just finished university in the United Kingdom. He's now an adult, but the devastating financial and reputational damage is still on my shoulder. I had to sell 2 apartments, had to work 6 years on the case, not to be imprisoned as a child abductor, because EU law is bad. In the meanwhile, they made a recast of this Brussels IIa regulation. It's even worse.
You've also got the insight in the Violence Against Women declaration, that's a directive that's coming out.
Directive, yes. And then I made a complaint. I started to make complaints. It's my job. I mean, I started to work when I lost everything as a language teacher, but it's my job. I can make good complaints. And to my biggest surprise, the answer was, we don't care. So they made now a new directive against, it's a proposal, violence against women. So I started to campaign and say, Commissioner Helena Dalli, European Parliament, everybody, hello ladies, pigs have more rights like mothers and children. You must do something, you must look at the law, why the law is bad, and then do additional amendments in the Brussels II regulation or the new version. And then the directive combating violence against women must help victims of domestic violence to flee into a better country. Oh, they didn't listen. They didn't listen. And now the new violence against women directive proposal came out. Obviously, they leave mothers, children, lesbians, gender critical feminists, everybody behind. So I think it's deliberate. I have now over 800 pages proof that it's deliberate.
Do you think it's actively bad against women, this new directive?
Yes, they actively harm. Yes, I have been. Yes, of course they do it. There are hundreds of emails which I have sent, court cases. Mothers are sending, there is a mother now who is in asylum in Switzerland, British Croatia mother. Mothers are seeking asylum because of the EU. The law is so bad. So I think this has reached now a point that they cannot hide it, that they deliberately, actively harming mother and children who want to flee from violence.
Our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights is what we're mostly focused on, the problems with implementing gender identity ideology. What have you found in Brussels is going on about that?
So the undermining, they started with the disenfranchisement and undermining of mothers and children who need protection from fathers' violence. This was already done in the early 2000s. Now they have put the assassination of women's sex-based rights, and I think assassination is the right word, to a whole new level. They are implementing gender identity ideology as if it would be in the treaties, but it is not. It's just a belief. And we have now reached a completely absurd situation that the far-right political groups or right-wing political groups in the European Parliament exposing this. That gender identity ideology is just a belief. Nobody should be labeled as anti-gender, as a fascist, neo-Nazi or whatever, just because you don't believe in gender identity ideology. And actually in the parliament, several political groups are deliberately undermining women's rights to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. They are labeling, naming, shaming us as anti-gender. It's all unlawful. And now what's happened? This new directive, which should combat violence, it's not yet a directive, it's a proposal for a directive to combat violence against women and domestic violence. It's still in the proposal state, but it's obviously left mothers and children behind, we know it, and it brought gender identity ideology unlawfully through the back door to a new level, because in Article 10, they want to enable the member states to criminalize everybody who is spreading online hatred because of gender. This means we see it already clearly. What is the goal of this directive, the hidden goal? We must expose it. In Article 10, they want to enable the criminalization of gender critical feminists and lesbians. So Article 10 is so bad, it should not be named as a law. So we want to collaborate now with criminologists, with law professors around the world, and make several complaints, not only because of the directive, but because of the dangerous Article 10, which is completely bonkers and enables the criminalization and imprisonment of innocent people.
Although the right wing in the parliament are articulating some of the arguments, they will certainly not be on our side to defend lesbians and gender critical feminists, because they don't actually want, I mean, they don't want us in the debate. They sort of overlook us because they don't want women to know we exist, because they want to offer, their offer is the submissive housewife. So we are in it's a very difficult place. Have you found women like you, or supporters of, you know, sort of women's sex-based rights in the institutions or around Brussels who are articulating our positions? No.
No, nobody.
Oh.
Nobody, but I think what we have to do and what we can do, I used to work as chief of international media relations. So the only thing we can do is to make a stand up and to demand public participation in the European Parliament, and to use the legal framework, because primary European Union law is on our side. The money is there. So what we can do, I mean, have allies in the member states, women's organizations, lesbians, mothers, and put everything what we know on the table and demand support and place.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got this very good experience of taking something to the Court of Human Rights, or to, you know, challenging something at quite a high court in Europe. And it could be that if you think of an action, then we've got, as WDI, we've got these 35,000 signatories, many of whom are in the European Union, and we've got lots of organizations. We could try to build a campaign.
Yes, we must campaign, Joe. We must campaign, Joe. And then my experiences during my own custody case, that was a time when I was completely deplatformed, because nobody allowed me to write and speak about this, but I still could win, because if you speak truth to power and you have people on your side, I think they are afraid. They are afraid. And we need to expose what's going on, and Women's Declaration is fantastic. With the tools you have, I'm not pleasing you now, it's true. With the knowledge we have in Women's Declaration, we can expose. Yeah. So we have the tools to expose the blatant lies, the undermining of the treaties, and we don't need the far right. We can say, invite us, give us the money, what we must have according to the treaties. Because this violence is causing billions of euros damage for the European citizens. So violence against women and children is causing, modest estimation, 300-400 billion euro damage a year for the taxpayers and for the states, mostly for the taxpayers, for the victims. It's a mass.
Can you clarify, Nicoletta, if you're referring to Article 10 of the ECHR?
No, I'm referring to Article 10 is in the proposal. Article 10 is in the proposal which the European Commission put on the table. It's a European Commission proposal for a directive combating violence against women and domestic violence. If adopted, then the member states must translate this directive into their national legal systems, so it will penetrate like a penis into the member states' legal systems, which will have the opportunity to criminalize, because of online hatred, cyber hatred, everybody who doesn't affirm the gender identity of a man or somebody else.
I'm beginning to think that this pattern is almost, it could have been in the Denton's playbook. There was this Denton's legal firm that wrote about 4 or 5 years ago about how this should, the Yogyakarta principles should be implemented. And I think using violence against women and the government's campaigning against it is being done everywhere, because in Britain, where I am and many of us are, there's a lot of action by the government and by local authorities and institutions saying violence against women is very bad. And I think it might be a a bit of a smokescreen that they're using that, and then the ultimate revelation of what they're trying to do comes in this directive. They're making it very clear how that's going to be turned against us. So while looking good, oh, we're against violence against women, they're actually going to be undermining a lot of our rights, it sounds like.
The real surprise is that the Istanbul Convention itself is undermining women's rights and children's rights. It's undermining, it's a Trojan horse, the Istanbul Convention, because it will support gender identity. So they started to say, no, it's just a role, but no, if you read the Istanbul Convention, you realize that it doesn't recognize women as a sex class with sex-based rights. So at this point, it is pointless. And the member states also don't implement, only 21 have ratified it from the EU. So it's a completely toothless tool and a Trojan horse. And now the EU wants to ratify it. 6 member states opposed it as a Trojan horse. They don't want it. Mostly far-right governments like in Hungary. But the EU Commission and the Parliament went to the Court of Justice, which allowed through the back door the EU still to ratify it, even though some member states don't like it.
We're going to hear from Gunda Schumann. Gunda Schumann is from Germany. She's a lawyer, sociologist, activist, member of the board of LAS Reloaded EV. She's going to talk about strategies of LAS Reloaded and other lesbian groups against transgenderism. And thank you so much, Gunda, for coming. And I'm really pleased to hand over to you and listen to you.
I will talk today about activities of, I pronounce it, Lesbisches Aktionszentrum, LAS Reloaded, and other lesbian groups against transgenderism. Included lesbian networking on this issue, which is very important. This is an addendum to the WDI conference of 2 weeks ago, a radical feminist response to transgenderism, what is to be done. LAS Reloaded wants to give their share on this very important issue. First of all, for all of you who may not be so well informed about us, I will tell you a little bit about the background of LAS Reloaded. In 2018, LAS Reloaded was established in Berlin after an exhibition about its predecessor, LAS, that has been active during the 70s and 80s as the first lesbian activist group in Germany. The graphic, which you see on the right side, shows spin-offs of the old HAW and LAS groups. HAW means Homosexual Action West Berlin. As you may remember, Germany had been split until the 90s, and West Berlin was part of the West, but was an enclave. So during these decades, the late 40s till the 90s, West Berlin was a very special place to live, and it was a great place for lesbians. So what is LAS all about? According to its concept, LAS Reloaded wants to preserve lesbian history and lesbian visibility, articulate lesbian interests in public, promote equal rights for women and men, organize and participate in national and international networking and meetings. This is particularly necessary at current times, when gender identity ideology is threatening to erase lesbians and lesbian spaces. On the left side, you see a bit more deliberated the aims and purposes and the activities. For example, in addition, public articulation of lesbian interests, promotion of intergenerational exchange, promotion of education, art, history, with focus on women. Activities, public relation and organization of events, administering of entrusted archives of lesbians, very important, entrusted estates and archives of lesbians, interviews of contemporary witnesses, and organization and participation in national, international networking and meetings. Now I will come to the actual topic of this afternoon and would like to start with an inventory. What have lesbians lost already due to transgenderism? First of all, organizations and networks. In Germany, I could mention the so-called Lesbenring, which had been an umbrella organization for decades for lesbian grassroots organizations. Today, it's completely queer and trans-inclusive. It is not representing and not even articulating lesbian interests anymore. Then furthermore, lesbian spaces like bars, pubs, any other places where lesbians could be together. Public reputation, politics and academia, very important. 30, 40 years ago, lesbians were a respected group, at least I can tell you for Germany. And there were a lot of publications, discussions, public fora, organizations. It's all gone. State funding of lesbian projects disappeared. Today, all kinds of trans organizations are state-funded, lesbian organizations not. Let's Reloaded in Germany, located in Berlin and other cities, does not get a cent of state funding since we are not trans-inclusive. Very easy. Then another very sad chapter are young lesbians. We perceive the fact that young lesbians don't dare to call themselves lesbians anymore. They have all other kinds of words, but lesbian is not fashionable anymore. It's out of order, out of date, whatever. It is just not used anymore. And last not least, lesbian archives of the older generation. There are many lesbians, of course, who were very active in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now are reaching old age and would like to leave all their documents and stuff in good hands, and where the stuff is being worked on and preserved. And these possibilities are also disappearing. Okay, now after this inventory, the question is, which strategies has Let's Reloaded been applying so far against transgenderism? The first block of strategies I would like to present to you is, I call selected events and lectures via Zoom for information of lesbians themselves and for friends. One of the lectures we had was from Zabet, a young detransitioner, whom we had for a Zoom meeting. And she had a talk about detransition in Germany and internationally, one time, the other sex and back. That was very impressive. And it showed for us, for the first time, very personally and intimately, what it means to go on the path of trans and then to turn back, to lose the social community, to lose many contacts, but to get to develop in a way that is at the end much more positive for the woman who is speaking about herself. So that was the case with Zabet. Then, of course, we were dealing with all the literature and all the background and all the misinformation and the information, scientific research and stuff. And I tried to summarize all that in a lecture for lesbians, for all kinds of women and friends, and I had a speech before a larger audience. After I had been deplatformed in Berlin by a left-wing organization who thought that I'm quasi-Nazi, and then Let's Reloaded organized a public place where we could control participants who were listening. And then I had a speech about the impact of transgenderism on lesbians, women, children, on the public at large. And that was, for many people, the first time that I heard about it. Before, I had a Zoom meeting at the yearly Lesbian Spring Festival in Germany. That was per Zoom. And that also was highly appreciated in 2021. Recently, we had a Zoom meeting with Tonje Giervon, a lesbian artist from Norway, who was very open in her criticism of transgenderism in her art community, and who was heavily discriminated against in her professional work, in her social life, and even her wife suffered discrimination. She was even going to lose her job. So Tonje visited us and was reporting relentlessly on the impact of one of the world's most extreme self-ID legislation and hate crime laws on life as a lesbian and for all women in Norway. We also organized a Zoom meeting with young lesbians who were so brave to participate in so-called dyke marches, but which were not real dyke marches because they were so-called trans-inclusive. But they joined these marches with their own banners and their own speeches, and there were experiences quite a lot of violence. What you see here are Susanne Frances and Liane Timmerman from UK, from Get the L Out, who was also speaking at our Zoom meeting. And we were discussing and informing about strategies on how they defended themselves against this violence. Susanne and Frances report they were using and producing banners, flyers, sticky labels, flags at dyke and trans pride marches, videos, documentation, and they were filing penal charges. Liane, the UK representative of the counter demonstrations against dyke marches, said, no announcement of counter demonstration or interventions, training of the own members, disguise, flyers, body cams, short videos, small actions with interviews to the press, and their own group is a sworn community of activists. Strategy summarized: stay course, reach out lesbians, don't get worn out at multiple dyke marches, put sticky labels in public spaces, for example, at supermarkets, recruit young lesbians via the internet, be a role model, provide spaces, distribute flyers. We are going to continue these strategy discussions, which we deem very important. The next block of strategies is publication. We try to publish gender-critical articles in readers, in books, in newspapers. It is a very hard job in Germany to be successful on that for lesbian feminists. However, recently I was successful to write an article in a legal manual for equal opportunity officers in Germany. It's called a contra article against the emerging self-ID law in Germany. And I got quite positive feedback on that so far. The third block are legal opinions on emerging self-ID and hate speech laws in Germany, addressed to politicians and holders of political mandate since 2020. At the bottom, you see a document that has been accepted by our German Federal Parliament Committee for the Interior and Home committee document with a certain number. That was very hard to get, but we got it. So our document, our critical statement on, in 2020, it was a bill of the Green Party on self-ID, was posted on the website of that committee for the Interior and Home. That was a success. Also, we are participating in legal opinions to the United Nations. Recently, the deadline for the country report, Germany, came up. It was in early April. And Let's Reloaded, as a non-governmental organization, has submitted a statement on the human rights situation in Germany to the UN Human Rights Council. At issue is the emerging self-ID law having a detrimental impact on the rights of women, in particular lesbians, as well as children. Another very cumbersome strategy is entering into a discussion with mostly conservative politicians of the German Federal Parliament, because it's they who lastly will decide what is going to happen with this self-ID bill that has been produced by the German Minister for Family and Women's Affairs and the Justice Minister. And we had some quite interesting discussions, and it became clear very quickly that many conservative politicians are gender critical and have an open ear and an open eye to that issue. We also joined signature campaigns with other women's or lesbian or gay groups. One of them is the German chapter of Let Women Speak. We signed protests against conflating gender identity with sex in an EU directive bill on violence against women and domestic violence to be considered by the EU Parliament. That is exactly that what my pre-speaker Nicoletta Hoffman was mentioning. And the second signature campaign was the criminal prosecution of Christina Ellings in Norway due to hate speech laws. And we signed a protest letter to the Norwegian ambassador in Berlin. Another signature campaign we participated in was from LGB Alliance, UK and Germany, against the homophobic expert Victor Madrigal-Borlos from United Nations Human Rights Secretariat, UNSOGI is the abbreviation. Now comes the practical side. We participated in demonstrations The first one was organized by Let Women Speak Germany in front of the Nordic embassies in support of Christina Ellingsen, what I just mentioned. And the second one was organized by Radfem Berlin together with Get the L Out, WDI Germany, Let Women Speak, against the emerging self-ID bill in Germany. One of the guest speakers was, hello, Sheila Jeffries from WDI UK. You will see a couple of photographs here where at the bottom right, there's a list of speakers. The left side is Let Women Speak. And at the bottom, you see the demonstrators. The last demonstration had around 200 female participants. Then we are, of course, also dealing with public relations. We try to keep and to get into contact with media and journalists. We have a website. We keep an eye on social media. And half a year ago, we launched a program complaint against a public broadcaster due to misogynist reporting in context with a Pride March, something like this. The outcome was, you will not believe it, but it's true. The boss of that public broadcasting program in Brandenburg, Berlin, apologized to us and agreed that it was a misogynist report. Gretel Schnell is one of my colleagues at the board of Let's Reloaded, who is in charge for social media. Yeah, now, last not least, alliances. We are a small organization, and of course, there are many others. And we try to find synergies, to find mutual platforms. First of all, the Real Dyke March. These were the young lesbians who were intervening into the queer Dyke Marches, what I told you before. Then with WDI USA, the Lesbian Caucus, we had a couple of Zooms together. We were discussing the Lesbian Bill of Rights. Then the Lesbian Spring Festival, the German Lesbian Spring Festival. By the way, it's called the former Lesbian Witzen Festival, which had been founded by the Lutz group and the HAW group in the early 70s, actually in 1973. Then Safia e.V., it's a lesbian group, an organized, registered lesbian group of lesbians age 40 plus who are considering and thinking about how to live in old age. Then we have WDI UK and Germany, of course, lectures, Zoom meetings, dissemination of information. Then we have Get the L Out UK, Zoom meetings, dissemination of information on Let's Reloaded website, and especially lesbian strategies at queer Dyke Marches. Very important for us. Then, as I mentioned already, Let Women Speak, signature campaign, demonstration, exchange of information. Then parents of trans teens. That is a future contact, because there we are dealing mostly with medical facts. Then LGB Alliance Germany and UK. And in the future, the Lesbian Project UK, we are going to initiate a contact together with WDI Lesbian Caucus in the near future. So what is to be done? In a nutshell, networking, promotion of lesbian visibility, preservation of our history, and request of government funding, last not least. Christiane Herdl is one of my colleagues at our board. There's a lot to do, let's get it done. Thanks a lot.
Deirdre O'Neill is director of, she's a filmmaker, and she's a director of documentary Adult Human Female, Defending Women, Safeguarding Science and Reason, #Reality Matters. She's a lecturer and filmmaker, founder and coordinator of the Inside Film Project, which works alongside prisoners and ex-prisoners making films from their own perspective. Adult Human Female is her 4th full-length documentary. So over to you, Dee.
Just to address that about the name of the film, obviously we had no idea that it would upset as many people as it obviously did. We just thought it was a dictionary definition, and because we're all in the same struggle together, we just assumed there was a shared vocabulary that everyone would understand. We had thought of other titles. So the other title that we had was Enjoy Your Erasure. But when we spoke to kind of other women about it, they pointed out that unless you were actually on Twitter and that you knew that was something that Sean Fay had said at some point to a woman, it might seem a little bit esoteric and people might not get it. So that's why we chose, Adult Human Female. Okay, so what I want to talk about a little bit is why we made the film. So we were approached by I don't know if people have seen the film, but for those of you who have seen the film, Mandy, who's in the film, she approached us and asked us to make a film about basically the clash between women's rights and trans ideology. And at that time, we were thinking about making a film about women in prison. As Joe just pointed out, I do a lot of my work around filmmaking in prisons. And that became a bit difficult, partly because lots of women didn't want to talk to us about their time in prison. So it wasn't a massive step to kind of broadening it out to what was becoming quite obvious to us was becoming a major problem. So the film comes directly out of the women's movement. It comes directly out of a kind of impulse to defend women's rights. In a country where shockingly 2 to 3 women a week are killed by a partner or an ex-partner. So there's definitely a need to defend women's rights. And the film, like all the films that we've made, and I've co-directed this film, as I've co-directed all my films, it's made on the side of people fighting oppressive power. So for me, this is not a single issue. It's part of a much broader kind of attack on democracy and logic and rationality and reality. It's an attack on all of those things. And the film is a rational and evidence-based exploration of the situation. And, as I say, for anyone paying attention, that situation is the clash between women's rights and trans ideology. And the film's underpinned by the experiences and the struggles of the women that we interviewed. We interviewed women and one man. And the hope is that anyone watching the film is going to kind of realize how incredibly reasoned the concerns are that these women articulate, and how reasonable their voices are. It's 92 minutes long, and it's an explainer. It's a kind of introduction, if you like, to a lot of the issues. Not all the issues, because, as this has kind of grown apace and as the trans umbrella's got wider and wider, it's really, really difficult for us to address all the issues. So we chose certain issues. So we chose the question of freedom of speech and academia. We chose the kind of medicalization and the way the media, and we talked about left-wing politics, which I want to talk a little bit about later on, yeah? So we wanted to kind of point out how far things have already changed the worse for women, and how difficult it is now for women, and that's come up in what I've caught of the other kind of talks that I just got into, how difficult it is for women to be heard, how often their voices are being shut down now. And it's not just about stopping us kind of speaking, it's actually stopping us knowing what's going on. Not for, I suppose, for those of us who are really aware and very involved in this, but for other women, there's a sense in which, because certain voices are being shut down, other women aren't getting information that they need to have. in order to realize the implications of this ideology. So what we hope to do is to make an intervention into the struggle and contribute to an understanding and to provoke discussion and of course eventually to transform the situation. And partly, like I say, for me, this is part of a much bigger issue because it's important to realise how gender relations have always played a role in the reproduction of capitalism. And capitalism has always depended on the oppression and exploitation of women. Without that, capitalism doesn't exist. Yeah. So it's also, for me, it's a class issue. Because for working class women, the oppression and exploitation within capitalism has manifests itself differently from privileged lives of middle and upper class women. And I think yesterday someone posted something, I think it was from 2019, of Emma Thompson supporting the trans ideology. And you start to think about, well, for Emma Thompson, it's fine. She's probably got private medicine. She's not going to ever be on a shared ward. Emma Thompson and her daughter are never going to be in a prison, happen to share a prison cell with a violent man. And this is what I mean, the kind of oppression and exploitation and experiences of working class women are very different from those of middle class women. So I do see this very much, as someone says in the film, as a kind of luxury movement, as a kind of, middle class movement where, working class women are struggling to feed their children and middle class women are kind of, fainting because you don't call them by the right pronoun. It's also what we wanted to do was kind of talk about how frightening it is, how quickly what was once taken as uncontroversial, such as the importance of sex, can now be declared out of date or passé, or it's an archaic idea, and that you're behind the times if you actually think there's such a thing as biological sex and we're a biologically dimorphic species. There's no scientific evidence for such a change in our thinking that can be offered for such notions as sex is a spectrum, or that sex is assigned at birth. Yet the policies of institutions, and I think other people have obviously brought this up, have been changed to align with these new beliefs. So that, for example, the police and media report crimes on the basis of gender identity. So she raped, she beat the hell out of, she, even though she is actually a he. But the doublethink is already in place. And that, I think, is really, really frightening. And I think this growth of idealism, this idea that it's how you feel that's important and not the kind of material reality of the world that we live in, and the denial of that material reality, has offered for some on the middle class left a kind of pseudo version of political radicalism. For them, the struggle for change is no longer grounded in the politics of class, nor do they acknowledge the working class and the damage that this ideology will do to working class women in particular. Demands for equality are not rooted in an understanding of how the system operates, and how it operates structurally to deny any meaningful opposition to the current brutal society in which we live. If the people who are considered to be on the left in public life are mostly privileged Russell Group graduates who have never experienced struggle, it's imperative we consider the impact that will have on the fight for a different world and what that different world might look like. So in the light of this, I think it's not difficult to consider the rapid rise of the transgender ideology and its commitment or concomitant activism, enthusiastically embraced by the middle class left, to be connected. And this is my kind of theory, if you like, that it's connected to the dismantling of radical politics over the last 40 years with the rise of neoliberalism and the demoralization and feelings of defeat that's engendered. So what we've got now is we've reached the point where, rather than discuss the injustice of imprisoning some of the most damaged and vulnerable people, women in our society, whose crimes are mostly related to their poverty, we have a left clamoring for the right of men to be housed alongside them in prison. And as for the consequences, and I actually tweeted this yesterday to someone who was kind of praising Emma Thompson, working class women are just collateral damage. The callous indifference to the needs of, in this case, working class women is exactly in line with the neoliberal strategy of demonising and ignoring the unemployed, the disabled, food bank users, those on 0-hour contracts. As far as I can see, this is part of a much bigger problem, yeah? And I think one of the interesting things about kind of transgenderism and men who say they are women, and it's not, and I've written about this actually, it's not the women who toil in the sweatshops of developing countries that the transgender activists wish to transition to. Rather, it's the objectified, successful bourgeois women that they aim to be. The reality for working class women of negotiating the institutional and personal power struggles in which their lives are embedded is not part of the appeal for men who claim to be women. On the contrary, as in all other areas of life, working class women are treated as unimportant or ignored, as the example of the prison makes clear. So I think this failure is rooted, the failure to address this problem is rooted in the left's acceptance of identity politics, with its assumption that a group, or the primary definers within a group, articulates its oppression, and how it articulates its oppression is the last word on the matter. Yet it's clear that one group's identity and its claims may easily clash with the claims and identity of another group. So we have, you know, the transgender claims for rights on one hand, and we have women, the claims for women's rights on the other hand. I think partly the problem with identity politics is it becomes a single issue. And once you have a single issue political kind of stance, what you don't do is think of the consequences of that for the other groups. What happens then is that there's no way of negotiating those conflicted claims. In the end, it's the group that can mobilize the most power is the group whose claims will prevail. And in a catastrophic alignment, which is what is clearly a men's rights movement, the left has chosen to side with the powerful over the less powerful, men over women, and middle class over working class women. And it is that they in particular who will bear the brunt of the trans rights as currently formulated. So rather than fighting for us all, and I think, you know, the idea that the transgender movement is full of very vulnerable people without any power, I think we can all admit, is a kind of, or agree, is absolutely absurd when you think about the institutional capture. So if you think about kind of, you know, the universities, the police, the National Health Service, you know, whatever institution you're talking about, the unions, you know, the trade unions, it's, you know, I'm in a trade union that completely and utterly supports this movement. So I know that, and so far, there's been no backlash over the film, even though I work in a university, but I do know that if anything happens, my union won't support me. They will support the people who will attack me.
But how have you found the reception? And are you finding there is a movement of these men in the left, or are they like carrying on? Well, and are they attacking you?
Well, number one, I mean, I don't think the Labour Party is the left. I'm not in the Labour Party. I've been Labour. I'm a woman and I'm working class, so there's no place for the Labour Party.
What is the left then?
I mean, I think that, I mean, there is a left. I you know, and I know that people say there's, you know, we're above the left and the right anymore, but I do think there are people who, you know, want to create a better world, that wants to make sure everyone's housed, everyone can feed their children, everyone can have access to free healthcare and a decent education. So, you know, whatever you call that group of people, I think it exists. So, I mean, I think there is. So, you know, as a kind of shortcut, we can call them the left. I mean, I think a lot of them now function outside of the Labour Party. And I do think that it's quite fractured. And as I said in my talk, I mean, I think that's part of the problem now, that if we had a kind of unified left, then we might not have this problem. I also think there's a massive problem with the way over the last 40 years that the working class have been consistently and strategically excluded from the public sphere. So I think, you know, at one point that in the Labour Party, I think 80% of their policies, their MPs came through trade unions, they came from manual working black backgrounds. Now it's something like 2%. So you have this massive shift, and the same as the media. You know, so we don't have many working class people in the public sphere. So the concerns that we have and the concerns that get put forward tend to be the concerns of the middle class and upper middle class, and they definitely don't want to talk about class because, you know, they might then have to start looking at their own kind of complicity and what's going on. I think, you know, one of the purposes or one of the roles this movement serves is that it deflects from class as an issue.
Can you tell us a bit about the reception of the film?
Obviously, you know, there's been massive kind of, you know, demands to have the film shut down, and it's been shut down a few times. It was shut down in Nottingham, it was shut down in Edinburgh University. We tend to show it in secret. We showed it in Belfast, we showed it in Oxford on Monday night, but it's in secret usually. As far as my university is concerned, it's been really interesting because I mean, I'm very open about my views, but I don't kind of shout them. But we were interviewed after it was struck down in Edinburgh, we were interviewed by the Times Education Supplement. Now, usually if your academics are interviewed by the Times, your university talks about it and goes, well,
yes, yeah.
Not a word. But at 8:30 that morning, my HR department emailed me and said, oh, hi Deirdre, how you doing? Are you all right? We noticed you've been interviewed. Have you had any is anyone kind of saying anything to you? And I emailed back and said, no, it's been fine. So they emailed me back and said, could we have a link to the film and let us know if there are any problems? And that's it. I've never heard anything else. And the same with my co-director.
Can you tell us which university it is?
Yes, my university is the University of Hertfordshire.
So that's quite encouraging,
isn't it? No, absolutely. I think it is encouraging. It's a post-92 university, so a lot of my students are working class students, first generation, a lot of from ethnic minorities. And I know, speaking to my students, that most of them agree with me, the ones that I've spoken to. University, I mean, I teach film, so yes, it is good. But also, you know, just recently one of my students wanted to include something about trans ideology in something about fake news, but we've decided she's not going to do it because she's frightened of the backlash, which I have brought up actually, and I'm waiting to hear back from, you know, the powers that be, because I think it's absolutely absurd, apart from anything else, that a student can't engage critically with a topical subject. It's been rescheduled for Edinburgh next week, but they are already kind of getting together to protest against it. There's kind of pages and pages of lies and misinformation about the film that's gone round to about 600 members of staff, I think, at Edinburgh University, saying that they shouldn't show the film. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen next week. I mean, we're going up to Edinburgh to be on the panel, but yeah,